Some days I'm really not psyched about being from Kansas, and it keeps happening more and more lately because, normally our state is fairly mildly Republican. We have really high state taxes, but somehow really underfunded schools, just like any other red state. But we tend to not be super aggressively bigoted. I mean, I say we, I mean, our legislative body has a tendency to not be crazy conservative in their overreach stuff that they do. But these last few years, as with everywhere else across the country, red places are getting more radicalized. They're trying harder to restrict rights. There was an attempted piece of legislation to amend the Constitution in Kansas after the Supreme Court affirmed that our Constitution, as it is written, guarantees a right to abortion. So, the people voted and protected the right to abortion in the end. But as far as our politicians are concerned, they've decided that we're going to take us in an increasingly authoritarian direction, let's say. So the most recent thing, I don't know if you've seen any of these other bills. I don't even know that we've talked about any of these specifically. There's these bills that keep passing that are, what their stated point is to prevent children from accessing adult content. But as with many, many things across the country, when you have a law that says we want to prevent these kids from accessing sexual content, a lot of the time you go read the definition of what counts as sexual content and it'll say something crazy vague. So let's talk about that a little bit. If you're enjoying this video, hit the like button, maybe subscribe, hit all notifications if you want. Feel free to check out the links in the description. You might find some merch you like, or you can hit up the Patreon to support the content and find free stuff. Kansas bill gonna require ID to view material that's, quote, harmful to minors, including, quote, acts of homosexuality. So the state legislature has passed this law as of the publication of this earlier this week. And I'm assuming that our governor, Laura Kelly, is going to veto it, but I don't know if they have a veto-proof majority on this. One of the problems in Kansas is that we're gerrymandered enough that there are enough people in the legislature sometimes to override the governor's veto. So even when the governor tries to protect trans rights or whatever else it is, there can be a veto override. That's how we have the bathroom restriction that also revoked all of our gender marker changes retroactively. Anything of a prurient nature, it depends on the law. This particular law doesn't say something like merely of the prurient nature. They actually get more specific. So this particular law says that material, quote, harmful to minors includes nudity and, quote, sexual content, which if you then look further, sexual content under the list of things that it has, it includes acts of masturbation, homosexuality, or sexual intercourse. It basically says acts of homosexuality. Acts of homosexuality is obviously very broad language. So if you just say any act of homosexuality is inappropriate for children, that includes like two girls holding hands and two men having a quick peck as one of them leaves for work in the morning or whatever. And that would include my content potentially. Like if I'm talking about queer rights and I'm informing about homosexual issues, like if we're talking about gay marriage or, homosexuality probably could be stretched to refer to transness potentially. And yeah, it's like any website that hosts any information about this. So Facebook, unless they start cracking down on any LGBTQ groups, they would have to start requiring you to register your state ID. Every website that you use that has any LGBTQ content on it. And like the original point was any adult website. So obviously an adult website under this law, whether it hosts LGBTQ content or not, you would have to use your state ID to access that content or buy a VPN, I guess. So in order to access, let's say YouTube or Facebook or any other website that hosts LGBTQ content or Twitter or anything, you would have to have your ID because you're supposed to be over 18 in order to access that. And if you're under the age of 18, you simply do not have access. Or if you don't have a state ID, you simply do not have access. An additional part of this is that a website could be fined up to $10,000 for each instance of a minor accessing their content. And then on top of that, parents are allowed to sue for up to $50,000 in damages. Now, I don't think that affects individual content creators, but if there is that kind of penalty for the websites, I'm not necessarily going to get sued $50,000, but because YouTube could be sued that amount many times over, they might just decide to stop supporting and hosting my content. Or they might require me to put an age restriction on my content, which obviously severely limits access. Age restricting content, it basically kills your ability to be found in search, and it also means that you can't host any ads on that content. So imagine if every YouTuber who's LGBTQ, who makes part of their living on YouTube through ads, just suddenly having a huge chunk of their revenue canceled. And then, if you run queer people off the internet, then no one is going to see any of the news about us. Does queer content, does that refer also to, let's say, a news website that decide to publish, here we're reading The Advocate talking about trans issues. So would that be censored? Would you be required to have a state ID registered with your username? Understand that registering your state ID with a bunch of different websites in order to, even if you're just going to see adult content, and even if this isn't required on YouTube and Facebook, you're still having to register your state ID in some private database owned by your favorite adult content website or whatever. And that means that your identity is vulnerable to being stolen. You have the potential to get doxxed if there's ever a leak. Because are all these companies going to update their privacy policies? Are they going to update their cybersecurity? They're not going to be required to, probably. That's one of those unintended consequences, is that you now suddenly have, maybe it's not even unintended, because each of these private companies now has a database of all the people who are trying to access LGBTQ content. This is just going to, I guess in a way that this is stimulating the economy somewhat by encouraging the booming market in VPNs and a new golden age of fake IDs. Is Disney Plus gonna have to stop hosting their new Toy Story movie? Because there's I guess they'll just have to post the version that they played in China, which didn't have the same-sex kiss. And even all this media for children, is that gonna be off limits to minors? Because the state law says that acts of homosexuality are inappropriate for they're sexually inappropriate for children. Keeping that in mind, two people of the same gender holding hands, is a gay marriage ceremony, is that an act of homosexuality? If they kiss at the end, it definitely is an act of homosexuality, beyond a shadow of a doubt. But, again, it's so vague and it's so far-reaching, and they just tack it in there. Ooh, acts of homosexuality, amongst other things about masturbation and sexual intercourse. And so the reflexive argument that they make is oh, well, why are you against this bill that's trying to prevent sexual content from being around children? It's I don't necessarily object. It's a highly nuanced conversation. I don't necessarily object to children being limited from certain websites, whatever. But I also don't know how you're going to legislate that in a way that doesn't severely curtail people's privacy and freedoms, because in the process of trying to prevent minors from getting on the internet, you're now going to require me, an adult, to register my state ID. Best case scenario, I just register my state ID with my ISP, and my ISP automatically connects me to the websites. But still, that's draconian. Everything that you have to produce an ID for, that's an additional barrier to being able to access whatever it is. And it's an additional time that you have to give someone your private information, and that your private information has to travel between you and someone. Does my ISP send my data to every private website that I visit? Do they notify me first? How are you going to do this? They're setting up an online police state, basically. The solution is better parents. I don't disagree with you. If you don't want your kid to have access to these things, then you need to contact the Geek Squad and have them put internet restrictions on your kid's internet, or you just need to be more present as a parent. But honestly, the kind of parents who would support this are the kind of parents who are no, I don't want my kid to see these things. But it's one of those weird things where people are oh, my rights as a parent are being restricted, or they're being infringed upon or something, but then they actually want to infringe on other parents' rights. What if I want my kid to learn about queer stuff? Literally, the state has decided that my kid, what if you have a queer kid Like, obviously they don't believe in queer kids, but like, what if I want my kid to learn about like famous gay people in history and their inventions and their contributions to science and art and literature? Why is my right as a parent being superseded because of some kind of like conservative ideal of like Puritanism, basically? What if my kid has a trans mom? What if I, as a trans adult, have a kid who's not trans but who wants to know stuff about it? Obviously they could ask me, but I'm not like a dictionary. I mean, I am personally, but some random trans person or queer person is not necessarily an expert in queer theory and history. I just happen to know a lot about that. But like, why? Yeah. Why do you think you get to infringe on the rights of parents to provide their children with educational resources? It's because that's how they're going to limit trans people and gay people. They tend to think, oh, folks generally stay in the closet if they don't know about this. It's only the ones who have severe dysfunction who actually come out in the absence of social support and acknowledgement. So the more we hide this from them, the less likely they are to come out. And the more we encourage people to be hostile towards these people, then the more we can force these kids back into the closet. So yeah, I just don't know. I don't know if this is going to pass. Like, I'm going to check actually and see if there's been an update on this. I currently don't see any indication of whether this has gone to Governor Kelly's desk yet. I'm assuming if it has just passed through the legislative body this week, then it will be going to Governor Kelly's office soon. And I hope that she's well aware of the duplicitousness of this law. I hope she vetoes it, and I hope that we, in this instance, don't have a veto-proof majority, but I'm not holding my breath. So I don't know what's going to happen, though. Like, is this the kind of thing, could we get a stay on this as it moves through the court system? Like, or am I just going to get a VPN so that I can access the internet without having to literally upload my state ID to God and everybody? I'm sure it would take a while for it to be implemented as well. So it may well be that they're going to, we're going to have to work on, defining specifically which websites need to do this. And like, I can hope that I'm just like not living in the state by the time this goes in. I'm going to have to use a VPN all the time. And of course it fits in with the whole book banning stuff. As they try to restrict access in schools, they start to notice that, I can't prevent access to the internet. So yeah, let's start to restrict that access as much as possible. I guess TikTok as a website and app would also be limited in this way. It's like, if we can't get the federal law to change, then certainly we can pass state laws that still sideways find a way to ban websites where we exchange critically important information, where we educate each other and organize with each other. If a gay org has a local like website, can't have that on there. What about that website? What is it called? There's a website where it's a meetup website where people can be like, ooh, we're doing meetups related to this subject at this place at this time once a month. If they were hosting any like an LGBTQ book club, would that be like, you can't host that content on that website without it being a requirement that you provide a state ID? So any local events, let's say you want to go to a local Pride event, you can't access the Pride website unless you have a state ID and you're 18. I think also it could affect websites that sell books. Like if Amazon has trans flags and they sell books that may deal with queer issues, like do you have to also have a state ID to get on Amazon? Adults only. Or again, does Amazon have to just block all of those listings within like two users within the state of Kansas? Who knows? Would something like a federal anti-discrimination law counter something like this? Because it explicitly says acts of homosexuality, which is discriminatory. So on current precedent, I think that would be struck down because the courts have repeatedly determined that it's sex discrimination if you discriminate against homosexuals or transgender people because of those things, If it wouldn't be restricted if a man and a woman were doing it, but it is restricted when a gay couple is doing it, then that's not in line with the 14th Amendment. But with the way that the courts are going nowadays, who the hell knows? They might find on a technicality during one of these cases that, actually, we've decided that homosexuality is not a sex-based discrimination case. So who knows what's going to happen? Let's cross our fingers and continue working on our personal safety in local areas. The things that are happening in these states are just going to keep getting worse, no matter what it is at this point. If you're in a red state, it's not going to get better. It's like inflation. It's like, oh, the inflation is slower now than it was last year, but it's still, the prices are still going up. So even if we slow down the steady increase in like privacy violations and getting in the way of people accessing medicine, even adults accessing transition related care, like it's only going to get worse. It might slow down, but it's not gonna reverse course at this point. So if you live in a state that's doing these things, you need to work on getting out. I don't think that you're gonna be able to stem this tide. Much love to my patrons, especially Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvog, Michelle Frattaroli, Amanda B., Wellington Marcus, Michelle Winter, Danielle McDonald, DZXN, Suzanne Maynard, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Jamie Jam, Pasnell Infinity, Nova, Sojo, Elizabeth Bartell, Ella V. Nobody, Kevin Young, Sarah A., Athiet, Celeste, Desi Quiche, Liam Hodgson, and Mr. Atheist.